Uh, First, disclaimer for my today's talk, meaning what I'm not doing is something which I want to make clear to you. Because I am talking about diseases here, I'm not here to give you any advice about how to behave in this time of crisis caused by COVID-19, because I'm not a certified doctor to talk about what measures you got to take to be safe from the disease. Instead, this particular talk will be 100% dedicated only to check out how literature has responded to various crises faced by humanity. And the model of the talk will be like this. First, let's have a kind of an understanding about what literature is and what kind of an imagination that we have had about literature and how literature has been treated by the society and how literature treats the society. And let's just check out if there is any kind of connection between literature and society, or if literature stands very much in some kind of a vacuum. Next, we'll check out how literature has responded to one very important crisis of humanity, that is diseases. Because like how we have the history of wars, we have history of diseases as well. And later we'll check out how life can be understood, how life can be enhanced with the aid of literature. So there's going to be a three-portion talk now for you, and I hope I'm going to make some sense to you all. Let me start the talk with a small question. What is the imagination that we have got about literature? In case you put this question quite generally to anybody, the answer could be that literature is interesting, literature is quite pleasing to the ears, literature is something which will enrich my vocabulary, literature is something which will actually give me a different perspective about life. So people say 1,000 things about literature. But as students of literature who in fact have got to do certain kind of professional investigation into this aspect of literature, discipline of literature, we need to know a little more than what the common people know in terms of their common sense. Because we are students of literature, we cannot use only our common sense. Instead, we got to be slightly more academic compared to the general public. So what is the imagination that we've got about literature? So besides talking about literature as having some kind of an influence on us because of its rich vocabulary, rich imagery, rich figures of speech, many such things, we also have to understand that literature has not been the same forever. Literature, in fact, has undergone a lot of evolution. And if we look back on time and just check out how literature used to be treated and why literature used to be created, we have some surprising revelation. Earlier, literature, in fact, was meant only for disseminating morality among people, disseminating religion among people. And I'm not talking about literature here in India, I'm talking about English literature basically. And later we'll just think about how literature in India also used to be in the past. There used to be absolutely no connection with general life as such. Instead, it used to always be quite didactic in nature. And the object and the purpose of literature in the earlier times used to only create a sense of morality in the people. And one thing that literature expected of people was certain amount of obedience. Meaning, when somebody wrote anything, and especially it was if it was mentioned inside the church, the people, whoever were part of the sermons, had to be obedient to what they heard, and they had to only follow it. So literature earlier used to be only in the form of sermons, and people had to be very obedient and follow this filial attitude and carefully adapt that as part of their way of life. And this kind of literature is called didactic literature, something that only preaches and never expects itself to be questioned. And such dogmatic literature, in fact, underwent several changes only in the recent past. And if we are talking about literature being away from art for art's sake, it's not really a very old phenomenon. Instead, it's a very recent phenomenon where art, in fact, became for life's sake. Because Jayapriya mentioned it very interestingly that art for art's sake kind of a perspective no more exists today, which of course is quite correct. And another addition to that point from my side is art for art's sake or art for life's sake, in fact, is a very recent phenomenon. And in case I have to be quite statistical about it, it is not even 100 years old. Otherwise, people used to find literature only in the church, and only limited number of people would create literature. Meaning it used to be a privilege only of a few people, otherwise it was not democratized. And people would never talk about literature being created by common people, because you had to have a specific social status to be in a position to create literature. Otherwise, you could not. Such being the case, you are not talking about literacy here. You are not talking about literature being created by all common people. Instead, you are talking about literature created by only a few people who formed the minority of the society. And this minority, in fact, could manage to wield a lot of control over the rest of the world, that is the majority, because of their ability to create literature. And this was the kind of literature that we used to have earlier. And later, thanks to this Enlightenment era, and thanks to this emergence of several thinkers in Europe, literature in fact started to expand itself. And if students of literature are present in this webinar, they would know that the period of Enlightenment in fact has got to be understood a little more closely here, because it gave people something called reason. And the word reason has got to be understood a little more closely here, because people started to understand literature and create literature a little conscientiously and a little more consciously about what life offered to them. That is, it was a need that was triggered by the era of Enlightenment, where people were expected to look at life with a critical perspective. So it was not necessary for people to unnecessarily use a lot of verbs or a lot of words to use this linguistic grandeur in literature, because people would understand literature in the earlier times only for the sake of the linguistic beauty. And in case you had a piece of poem for reading, people would appreciate only the expression part, and there was nothing for you to take home. In case you read a poem, you could not change your life, you could not bring about certain transformation in yourself. Instead, it had to only enrich your vocabulary or enrich your figures of speech, except that literature in fact did not serve greater purposes. But things changed quite drastically because of the emergence of this Enlightenment era, wherein people understood that literature in fact had bigger purposes to serve. And major understanding and major revelation for people was such that they understood that if I read anything, and if I want to consider some book as good literature, it has to cast its influence upon me with such force that I have to undergo some transformation. Otherwise, it's not good literature. I repeat, if you really consider any book to be quite readable, then you got to be inspired by the book so much that you have to undergo serious transformation. The book, in fact, has got to have in its fold something to offer you. And that thing that is offered to us, in fact, has got to create a major stir in us, a major transformation in us. And I should be able to look at my life with enhanced perspective. Only then it is called good literature. So literatures, in fact, started to expand their realm and consider the issues of the world. And the issues of the world, in fact, were considered not to romantically exaggeratedly give imaginary versions of the world. Instead, they wanted to somehow create a critical perspective about the social issues. So literature, in fact, now got shifted from the hands of the minority, and people started to use literature as a tool to understand life. And then there was a major shift in the area of literature, and that shift is from being singular in its perspective literature became pluralistic. I repeat, singular in its perspective, in the sense it was talking only about morality, it was talking only about certain ways of life. There was not much of a critical perspective about life as such. And later, when it was democratized, when it became part of common people's lives, suddenly there was a change in the very way literature was treated, and it became pluralistic. There used to be a lot of people who would create a lot of things about life, and one of the things that actually became part of literature was diseases. Otherwise, people would not talk about diseases at all, because diseases are not interesting, and they are not inspiring, and diseases are distressing. And nobody would read your book in case you want to talk about a disease. But such initiative was taken by the people in Europe. And if we kind of count the number of books that have been written on diseases, it will go to about more than 80 to 100. And if we want to take a look at for how many years such books have been written, we will be astounded to know that there have been books being written on diseases for the last 100 years or so. And people, in fact, have been discussing diseases almost for the last 100 years, and they are discussing diseases with a major purpose, that is to check out the behavior of human beings in the face of diseases. I repeat, why is it that the writers have got to talk about diseases? It's not really to distress people, and it's not to create a sense of disgust in people. Instead, they want to check out how people have behaved in the face of crisis caused by diseases. And one of the observations that I want to share with you here is there has not been much of change in our way of responding to diseases for the last 100 years or so. There has been only a regular pattern in our behavior. There has been a regular pattern in our responses to all kinds of crises caused by diseases. It will first start with suspicion. Supposing somebody mentions the emergence of any disease, the collective consciousness, that is the people, will simply dismiss that particular suggestion about a disease. They will consider the person to be lying to them. For example, anybody mentioned to us about the emergence of a disease like corona disease here in India, we would simply dismiss that particular idea because we had already conceived that or perceived that it was only part of China. And we wanted to somehow keep ourselves away from the belief about corona disease because we didn't want to believe in it. There used to be always that inherent fear to believe in it. Because of that, we would wear this facade of logic, the facade of rational thinking, and we would simply dismiss all the ideas regarding the diseases. And this is exactly how people have behaved in the face of all diseases in the past. And most writers have spoken about one particular disease, which in fact has consumed more lives than even Holocaust. And that disease is plague. Plague, in fact, has consumed millions of lives across the world, and people have written about plague because it's a very interesting phenomenon which has always repeated, and we have always behaved in the same manner, and there has not been much of change despite the emergence of so much science and technology. Whenever there has been any kind of an epidemic, there will always be suspicion in the beginning, and later certain kind of panic, and then there will be certain kind of intervention by the government and intervention by doctors, and then we will all become part of this phenomenon called death, and then we will start praying to God, and we will start thinking about the lost social life, and we will also pray for the resurrection of the lost social lives. And this has been the case with all of us for about 100 years or so. And another thing is, in case your parents mention anything about plague today, because we also have history of plague, and India being the country of famines and lots of other issues, also has this history of plague as well. And if your parents or your grandparents mention about how people used to behave during the times of plague, we will all be surprised, you know, we will find that to be funny, because how can somebody simply evacuate almost an entire village and live on the periphery of a village just because some rats died? And how is it possible for some people to simply forsake their property and live on the boundaries of the village and wait for the plague to simply disappear? And how can you again get back to your place after a time of about 1 month or 2 months? Because this simply seems to be an incredible phenomenon for all of us. But such incredible phenomenon, which in fact has been discussed by so many authors in so many books, has now become part of our own experience. And suddenly, the kind of anxieties our ancestors felt about diseases has become part of our own experiences, and we are reliving their lives. We are reliving the anxieties of our ancestors. And what kind of an anxiety is this? It's a very interesting anxiety, you know. This anxiety suddenly reminds us of what we have so far lost, and people have become very philosophic about life, and people in fact are talking about social life, and people are talking about the reformation of their family life, and people also are talking about the meaninglessness of making so much money, meaninglessness of their profession, and they want to somehow relive their family lives, and they want to think about the reunion with their family life, just because they have lost it for the time being, because there's something called mm, quarantine, there's something called lockdown. And people in fact mentioned in the recent WhatsApp posts that we have actually become rich with new vocabulary, and that new vocabulary is quarantine, lockdown, all such things. But let me tell you, this word quarantine in fact has been part of literature for the last 100 years or so. And if I have to give you the example of a book, it was written way back in 1912. You know, the book's name is The Scarlet Plague, written by Jack London, an American author, and it was written in 1912. And even in that book, he happens to mention something about quarantine and how people responded to this quarantine. It's a kind of an imprisonment. It's a kind of an unbearable imprisonment. And suddenly, we become aware of the beauty of social life only when we are deprived of it. And there has been this kind of a pattern in most part of our behavior almost for the last 100 years or so. And if I give you the description of both these novels which I want to discuss with you today, that is The Scarlet Plague and The Plague, written by Albert Camus, both books talk about us. Even though they are written by European authors or American, one is a European author and the other one is an American author, both different continents, we can definitely relate ourselves to this phenomenon of plague and phenomenon of ubiquitous death. Death which in fact is all pervasive. Death which in fact is very much lurking behind our backs. And we have always taken this death quite lightly. And today we have started to talk about death in clear terms. And this is exactly how people behaved in the past as well. And another interesting thing I want to share with you here is when this corona disease spread across the world, suddenly there was a huge demand for the book by Albert Camus, the Nobel Prize winning author, and the book which I'm discussing today, that is The Plague, because the plague discusses a very interesting phenomenon of all pervasive death in a small city called Oran. And whatever Albert Camus has mentioned in that particular book is in fact is being replicated by the people of the whole world. And how much ever or whatever he said about the behavior of the people there, in fact, is not in any way different from what we are doing and how we are behaving today. Because when it is death that we are faced with, and when we have death staring at us right in our face, there is always that inescapable anxiety. And that anxiety gives way for something like selfishness, and we become completely unconcerned about the others, and we start assuming that it's only our problem and our problem is pretty unique, and we also become quite indifferent to the others problems. And there are so many things which in fact have been observed even today by all of us Indians. And the Scarlet Plague, the book I mentioned, is interesting for one reason, that is the narrative technique is extremely interesting. It's a story that is narrated by a professor of English, and he happens to be the only survivor of San Francisco, survivor of the Scarlet Plague. And I want students to understand the meaning of this word Scarlet Plague here, because it's a very serious issue that was being faced by the people there in America. That is, the body would turn red if you are affected with that virus. And the body would turn red, and there would be extremely high fever, and you would die in quick time. And there was absolutely no solution for this except for maybe God's blessings. There was nothing you could resort to, and in case you are affected with it, you could only count time. Such being the case, here the professor, our narrator in the book, happens to be pretty lucky to survive this deadly plague. And the book becomes extremely interesting because he recounts the tale of this particular disease after a gap of about some 3 years, when he comes back to San Francisco. So when he comes back to San Francisco, he is astounded to see the people being pretty happy, having forgotten the onslaught of this very disease. They would have forgotten the onslaught of the disease so easily that when he wants to tell them about what people underwent and how the very disease depopulated the whole city of San Francisco, they will laugh him away. They don't believe that there was some kind of a disease which could eat up almost the entire population of a city, because how could the death of a rat, or how could a small virus kill gigantic human beings? It's like if you get back to Henrik Ibsen's play An Enemy of the People, there is a doctor who tells the city officials that you cannot construct the public toilets there because there are bacteria present in the water that is being supplied to the public toilets or public baths. And the people there in England, Europe, are surprised by the doctor's revelation. They ask him one question: where is the bacteria? And the doctor is quite scientific in his observation, and he says, like, the bacteria is invisible. You can only look at the bacteria with the use of a microscope, and the people will make fun of him because they are actually expecting some kind of a huge animal which could be threatening enough to kill humanity. Same thing with Scarlet Plague. When Smith, the narrator of the novel, comes back to San Francisco, he is quite surprised to see the indifference of the people to the disease, because they don't believe that there was this disease called Scarlet Plague. And they can't even understand that the bodies would turn red, because they are healthy today and they have completely forgotten the disease, and there's nothing like death happening, and every damn thing is so beautiful in their social life. There is fun, there is liquor, there is food, there is no death there. And suddenly there is one mad guy who comes from some distant place who talks about death that had actually been caused by some plague some 3 years back. And here, then Smith talks about how it all happened. How it all happened. Just check out how it happened here in India. And I'm going to just unfold the details of the novel here. And as and when I unfold the details of the novel, you will understand how things unfolded themselves here in India, almost parallel to the story of the book, right? It starts with his class in his college, and one of the girls simply collapses. And if you have a student collapsing in your class, you will find out the reason there, and you'll definitely give some first aid treatment. But nothing seems to work on the girl, because she starts turning red. And her body turns red, and this guy, who in fact is educated and also knows certain things about diseases, suddenly becomes aware about something being extremely wrong in the case of that particular girl. And he also understands that they are about to face an epidemic. And you should understand the meaning of the word epidemic here. even though we talk in humanity to help others who are sick, when it comes to epidemic, you cannot touch people. It is humanity for us to lend our helping hands to the people who are sick, but unfortunately, in the case of epidemics, you cannot touch people, because the characteristic of any epidemic is it will simply affect the healthy people. And because at this particular moment you are healthy, you cannot simply outstretch your hands to help the ones who are sick, because it will definitely affect you as well. And tomorrow you may have to be given some helping hand by others who have almost the same generous heart. So Smith becomes aware about the condition of his student, and he goes back home and narrates the story to his family. Surprising thing, his family will become quite scared about getting associated with Smith, because they assume that he also has become affected with the plague. And suddenly there is a dissolution of his own family, and there is so much happening in his family. And how come my own family members have disowned me? I am pretty healthy and nothing has happened to me. And why is it that you have this fear that I am also affected by plague? Simple reason here is you were with that particular girl for more than a minute or so, and this invisible virus will take hardly seconds to just get inside your body. It could be airborne, or it could be through the physical touch, it could be through any other means. It may have definitely entered your body, and you are an untouchable now. Beautiful, right? Because in India, we talk about untouchability only in terms of caste system. And look at Corona, it is just like God. It created untouchability among the entire humanity. The whole population, in fact, has become untouchable. And you cannot in any way think about having any kind of physical contact with people, even to shake hands with them as a social greeting. Such is the uh, uh, overwhelming feature of an epidemic. And Smith becomes very sad about his own condition, and he cannot convince his people. Ultimately, he has to somehow distance himself away from his family. And there is this tragedy which is quite minor in the beginning, and he goes away from San Francisco because death is happening everywhere. Simple. He wants to save his life. He wants to save his life. And later, he also thinks about how selfish he was becoming. Think about this, there is always some kind of an irony that is brought about by these epidemics. We who are part of universities talk big things, and we tell our students to have humanity because we are part of humanities. And here in the case of this epidemic, how magnanimous can we be in the face of a person who is affected with corona disease? Can we really give him our helping hand? Because when Smith runs away from San Francisco, he is horrified by his behavior. And he is also overwhelmed by the sense of guilt that occupies him. I am going away from death and I'm escaping it. In the meanwhile, I'm not in a position to help my people who are affected with the scarlet plague. And why is it that I'm behaving like this? And this is exactly how we all have behaved. This is exactly how we all have behaved, because what matters to us at the moment is life. And you talk to any Indian today or anybody of this world today except Americans, what is important, and they will definitely say life is important. And only the Americans are saying masks are not important, but otherwise the rest of the world in fact has considered the masks to be extremely important, social distancing to be extremely important, washing hands to be extremely important. Because if you live today, you can definitely, sorry, if you survive today, you can live tomorrow, because you have to survive this corona disease. And same thing with Smith, he wants to survive the scarlet plague because he cannot see so many red dead bodies. I repeat, he is horrified to see so many red dead bodies, and it is simply horrifying. And in the meanwhile, even more horrifying for him is how to give them a decent cremation, because we all have different kinds of funerals, cremations, and we have our own system. But when it comes to an epidemic, suddenly humanity loses all its dignity. Humanity loses all its charm. You had to give people some kind of a cremation that used to be given to people way back in 1940s during the times of the world wars. When there are deaths happening everywhere, you can only go for mass cremation. And here, the epidemics will bring about another horrifying phenomenon, that is, the people cannot see see the dead bodies of their loved ones. And the same thing happens in the case of Scarlet Plague as well. And remember this, it was written way back in 1912, almost 85 years back. And at such moment, Jack London, in fact, had observed so much that had happened in the city of San Francisco, which in fact had become depopulated. So many people had died. And whatever he documents in that particular book, in fact, is being documented by all books, all people who ever talk about diseases, right? And ultimately, the book ends with Smith talking about the resurrection of the old times, right? And that particular passage wherein he speaks so much about the resurrection of the old times is extremely interesting, because it's almost like our own biographies. And the people who have written about diseases are almost our biographers, because they seem to be writing about us only. And he speaks about how beautiful life used to be. And I still remember a very interesting post that was shared on Facebook very recently. Somebody had posted their own picture of eating pani puri on a street, and the caption given to that particular post was interesting. This was in 2019 BC, before Corona. So it was then that we had this lovely time of having pani puri by the roadside, and today we can only dream about it. So the kind of social institution that we had constructed, the kind of life that we had constructed, has simply been dismissed by this corona disease. And these literatures, called the plague literature, has beautifully mentioned about how our social institutions or our efforts are almost nullified by nature, because we are nothing in the face of nature. And no matter however advanced we could be in the area of science and technology, when it comes to facing diseases, we actually become almost like clowns, because we talk about we talk about medicines, we talk about advancement in the field of medicine, but it is very surprising that so far we've not been able to tackle the area of viruses properly. We have done so much in the area of creating weapons, right? You talk about weapons, you talk about mass killings. We have been extremely creative. We've got hundreds of weapons, we've got thousands of weapons to kill people. But when it comes to solutions created for the viruses, we don't really have anything. And for the last 6 months or so, we are anxiously waiting for something to come up. And WHO has only been saying different things at different times, but no solution has so far come up. And this is exactly what Jack London had mentioned way back in 1912. Even then, people were struggling with the lack of medical facilities. And all that people had to do then was just maintain distance. And the moment the rats were found to be dying, all that you had to do was simply vacate your places, and don't you ever take chances with this plague, because it will definitely consume you. It's almost like wildfire. And moving on to the next book that I want to discuss with you, it's The Plague. Okay. And this is my strong recommendation for the students. And if you have time, just try to get hold of this book and read it, because it is available online. And in the meanwhile, if you are not all that comfortable reading books online, you can just buy it, because it is written by Albert Camus, a Nobel Prize winning author in the year 1947 or 42. I'm not sure, just check on that. But it was written in 1940s. Okay. The name of the work is The Plague. The Plague. So just check out, in case this kind of a book were to be written some 300 years ago, would you find it to be interesting? Because it was disgusting for the people then. There used to be simple model of writing. There used to be one model of writing, like I mentioned. That model of writing was linguistic grandeur. But now we have different models of writings, and today we subscribe to the model of looking at life critically. And this particular book, The Plague, in fact, looks at the disease called the plague, which consumed the city of Oran. And the narrator of the book is a doctor by his profession called Ryu. And these names, in fact, will always have strange spellings, and the spellings and the pronunciation will not match. I am pronouncing the name as Ryu, but the spelling of the name is Rieux, and the pronunciation is Ryu, and he's a doctor by profession, and he's the protagonist of this particular book. And you'll not have heroes in these works, you'll only find the central characters who play certain very important roles. It simply begins with the death of rats, right? And the book suddenly opens with the death of rats, and there's nothing like a glorious beginning to the book, like how it used to be in the past. And books written especially in the 20th century don't care to give you a wonderful beginning. Instead, they would want to simply distress you right in the beginning, and they'll talk about death, they'll talk about disgust, they'll talk about dirt, they'll talk about anything that is part of our life. If you are asked a question like as to why people talk about diseases, you can only simply answer the questioner that diseases are part of our life and literature talks about life. And here you have death of rats being mentioned right in the beginning, and the doctor becomes quite aware of something going wrong in the city of Oran. So interesting reactions by people. It's not just one or two rats that are dead. There are hundreds of rats that are dying on the street, and when he shares his anxieties with people, there are two surprising responses. One of his patients says that the rats may have died of hunger. And this is how we behave, right? We talk as though we know everything. We don't actually have 100% faith in what the doctors are saying. If Devi Shetty comes on our screen and mentions that you got to keep washing your hands every now and then, we don't understand the actual phenomenon of washing hands regularly. Instead, we use our logic, we use our rationale and question doctors. And the same thing happens to our own doctor here, Ryu, who is insulted terribly by even the authorities of the city, who simply refuse to clean up the city by clearing all the dead rats. Instead, they say that one or two rats, in fact, are not big evidence for us to simply understand the phenomenon of plague here, and you are exaggerating. And one of the interesting things about these diseases is they are not very frequent. That is exactly why we tend to take them lightly. In case there is plague here in India today, we don't take it seriously because it must have happened to Indians some 100 years back. So it's not a very serious thing for us. In case it were to be a periodical thing, then we could be always in that state of preparedness. But unfortunately, these epidemics have a tricky nature. That is, they come once in a while, just like volcanoes, without much of a sign. And here, when Ryu wants to alert the people of a city, they don't take him seriously. And one of his patients says, like, it could be because of hunger, doctor. Like, how can you simply understand this to be plague? And then another customer says, another very interesting thing. You are overestimating the situation. So you are overestimating the situation. And the doctor is the only lone warrior, and you have the whole city ridiculing him. So Camus gives wonderful description about how the doctor's efforts become nullified in the beginning, and that is exactly where the city of Oran loses most precious time. Take, for example, what happened to Italy. Italians, in fact, have got close rapport with the Chinese, and they have business dealings with the Chinese, and we know about it. And they also have this policy of hug a Chinese a day. And when this corona disease, in fact, was widely spreading across China, and when the Chinese were going to Europe without being tested, the Italians didn't care to be careful. And they would continue with their policy of hug a Chinese a day. And you go back on our history in the last 3 or 4 months and just check out how the cases in Italy simply rapidly increased. And the Italian Prime Minister simply went for lockdown. And then again, the people took it lightly. They just had vacation. And because of which, many Italians had to lose their lives. And the same thing happened in Oran as well, in the book written by uh, Albert Camus. People take his uh, advises very, very lightly. Nobody takes him seriously. And here, when he is the lone warrior, you have almost a whole city against him. So the whole book is all about collective consciousness versus individual consciousness. So collective consciousness is the city of Oran, and individual consciousness is just this lone warrior, Dr. Ryu. And he cannot do anything about it. All that he can possibly do is to simply create certain awareness in the people, because he has just one commitment. He is a health worker and he has just one commitment, and his commitment is to make sure that people don't die. He wants to somehow give treatment to people, and in the meanwhile keep the people away from the deadly disease. And when he approaches the media, another very interesting response. There is a character called Rambert in the book, and he happens to be part of the media, and he refuses to print the news about the disease. And today we have the media, in fact, talking so overwhelmingly about corona, but unfortunately, the same media across the world had not created the same kind of attention among the people about corona, because we all had assumed this corona to be only part of China. And if you remember the Janta curfew, which was called by our Honorable Prime Minister, how was it treated? It was supposed to be quite a serious gesture by almost the entire nation, and all that we had to do was to remain at home and later applaud for the efforts of the health workers. But people converted the entire thing into some kind of a jatra. And people came out not only to applaud, they also came out with certain vessels to make a huge amount of noise. And this actually became a very interesting meme for the rest of, became clowns in the face of the rest of the world, because we behaved so ridiculously against corona. And the objective that Modi had behind his call for this Janata curfew was simply nullified by our ridiculous behavior. And the same thing happened in the case of Oran as well, in the book written by Albert Camus, where the media doesn't take the words of our doctor seriously. And next is the intervention of the godman. There is a priest, and he says it's the curse of God. It's the curse of God. And the people are always in a state of confusion. There are, of course, rats dying, and in the meanwhile, people are also dying almost in equal measure, and no solution for it. And the solution being offered by the doctor is not good enough. It's not pleasant to their ears. All that he's saying is, you got to remain at home. You got to remain at home, or you got to leave the place. So both the things, in fact, are unpleasant for all of us, because we don't like to remain at home, and nor do we like to just simply forsake the entire area and leave and move to a different place of safety. Because we have certain kind of an emotional bondage with our place, and in the meanwhile, we simply believe that we can wait for the plague to go away. And the same thing is happening in the case of Indians as well. They think they have immunity. They think that Ayurveda will cure them. They think simply gargling with some hot water will cure them. And because of this overconfidence, there is always this negligence in the behavior of all of us, because of which the cases are rapidly increasing. And the same thing happens here in the book as well. And Ryu is a muted witness who has to, of course, bear with the losses of so many lives. And he's a doctor, And the doctor, in fact, would want to somehow help people live. And here he sees the people dying. He sees the people dying. And another interesting thing here is when the authorities react and call for quarantine, people start treating that to be horrible imprisonment. They don't really want to be imprisoned. In the meanwhile, they start thinking about their lives. Didn't it happen to us as well? When we were locked up, there were, of course, some happy moments in the beginning, and people started to post so many pictures of new food items that they cooked at home, and WhatsApp and Facebook used to be filled with posts by people of the kind of things that they were doing at home, and that could be a facade or that could be natural, we don't know, but somehow people created some happy moments in the beginning. But when there was this threat of the extension of the lockdown, people became panic stricken. And in the meanwhile, another very interesting phenomenon that happened across the world is the loss of jobs. People simply lost jobs, and think about so many professions which actually have gone almost completely wayward because of this onslaught of the disease. So many people in fact are jobless today, and the same thing and the same phenomenon was discussed by Albert Camus as well. And that's exactly why these works are classics for us, because they keep retelling our own tales to us all the time. And anytime you get back to any classic, it tells you your own story repeatedly, and you always identify yourself with the story because it's almost your own story that you happen to be seeing in a classic. And that's exactly what Albert Camus does here when he talks about the widespread plague. And then as uh, the responses by the godman, and one of the priests called Panelu of Oran, who is a priest, delivers a sermon for the people. He says it's the curse of God. And this actually irritates the doctor. He wants the priest to talk a little more sensibly. He wants the priest to talk a little bit of sense into the minds of the people, but unfortunately, he doesn't get much of support from the priest also. But there is some development in the course of the novel when we move towards the second part, that is when there is this quarantine. Then the priest understands that there are certain things which are beyond our logic. There are certain things which are beyond our usual understanding of life, because the priest had thought that he could understand life only through the use of Bible, and the people who belong to science had thought that they could understand life with the use of rationale, logic, and the rest of the world, in fact, had thought that they could simply trust one of them. And suddenly, when there was this onslaught of plague, the disease simply nullified all kinds of perspectives about life. The perspective that had been constructed by science got nullified because science could not in any way confront the plague. And in the meanwhile, what the religion had said about life also got nullified because people were losing lives without making any mistakes. They were all innocent people who were dying. So the perspectives created by both the sciences and the religion got nullified by this nature, and or the disease called the plague. And later, when people understand that they were faced with some kind of a serious disease, then there is a realization, a collective realization, and then they'll start thinking that of course we have to act together, and we have to act together to be in a position to help one another, and let's not be selfish. And it is then that Dr. Ryu understands that the people, in fact, have to understand that there is absolutely nothing like beating nature. Instead, you got to continue to live, because we all have to face all these absurdities posed by life. And the book actually becomes a wonderful treatise about the philosophy of the absurd, precisely because of this. Because no logic works in the face of life. No logic works in the face of the disorderliness of life. And we always think and assume that life can of course be in an order if we put in efforts, but all our efforts in fact will go for a toss in the face of nature. And Dr. Ryu understands that no such thing can really work. And later, there is an unfortunate end to the novel because Dr. Ryu happens to lose his wife to the same disease against which he was fighting, to the same disease from which he wanted the people to be free. That is, she is affected with plague and she will die. But fortunately, after a period of some months, the plague will disappear, and Oran will resettle itself for the next part of its life. And then Dr. Ryu, of course, is pretty happy about it, and he is hailed as a hero. All such things are okay, but Dr. Ryu knows one thing: the plague has actually disappeared only momentarily, and the plague in fact might come back almost with more force in the near future. So this is some kind of a warning that he wants to give all the people around, but the people as of now are not in that position to believe in his warning. And the same thing holds good for us as well, because people are saying that we have to continue to live with corona no matter whether the vaccines will come or not. So life is all about, again to quote Camus, life is all about tenacity. Life is all about simply living without trying to be rational about it. Thank you.